Today we're going to be working on the Omega supercharger. We're going to be rebuilding the piston for maintenance purposes. So let's undo all of our screws. There are 2 screws in the very front, 2 screws in the very back. Let's take that off. Rotate the compressor around. Once your sides are off, take 2 14mm wrenches. Be careful, your little O-rings do not fall off. Lift up on the blue lock and pull down. Let's jump up to the top here. Let's take off our little O-ring. Now, let's take off the cover, being mindful of the little wear. When you're taking the cover off, observe all your lines. Next, let's take off our water lines. This is an 18mm. Some water will come out. And there is another water line in the back here too. That's a 13mm. What I like to do is to put the 2 lines together. Carefully set that aside. Next, let's take off our stainless steel line. Take 2 14mm wrenches. Be mindful of the little O-ring here. Next, we're going to take off the 2 14mm nuts. Next, we need to undo the crankshaft. Take off these 4mm Allen head screws. Set this aside. Sometimes you have to insert a wrench to rotate the crankshaft around. I like to try to put it in the 12 o'clock position. Inside there's a 4mm Allen head. Take this off as well. When this is off, take your 2 fingers, pull that out, and just gently pull it up. Once you get your head off, kind of dump the water out of the cylinder head. What we're going to do now is to pull the cylinder sleeve off. Just set that to the side. Take off the 4 10mm nuts. Set your upper and lower split rings to the side. Carefully pull your piston apart. You can take some snap ring pliers and undo this bottom seat. Sometimes they can be a little tricky. There's going to be 2 black balls. Make sure you do not lose them, and 1 lock washer inside of your bottom. Make sure those stay together. Next, we're going to slide off your 1 cylinder here. This can be on kind of tight. Set him aside. Let's take out the high pressure piston. Again, can be difficult. It generally will always fight. going to be changing the O-rings and the O-ring support. What we need to do, a couple of different options. Hold on to your bottom piston. You can either take a razor blade, as I do. I always use a razor blade. It's easier. My hands are so greasy, trying to hold on to a regular screwdriver is difficult. Inside of this head is a tiny, tiny check valve and spring. You will also be changing this little spring and check valve. Very, very small. Try to take him out. He's very small. Here it is right here. In your maintenance bag, we do have another one. We're going to set him to the side. We will come back to him. Let's take off your upper support, O-ring, and lower support. These have been worn out. Set those to the side. In your maintenance bag, you have brand new ones. It's your upper support, your O-ring, and your lower support. While you're here, locate your spring and your check valve. They're very tiny. Put everything back into your maintenance bag. In your lower support, your lower guy, there's a steel pin. Make sure he does not fall out. Put him back in. Let's slide this guy off. Discard him. Let's put a little bit of dab of renewable lubricants grease onto your shaft. In your bag, it does come with the O-rings to fill into it. There are two tiny O-rings in here. It may take you a little bit of time to get these O-rings set. Once you put your O-rings in your seat, in order to slide your new seat on, we must take out the bottom seat. Push the steel pin off to the side, pull him out. There are going to be two tiny O-rings. Let's take those off and set those to the side. Slide your new seat on. Because my hands are greasy. There you go. You got your new seat on. Put your little tiny O-rings back into the two grooves. Take your seat, align that up with the hole. Take your steel pin, insert that back in. Should look like this now. What we're going to do, we're going to clean the threads. Take a little bit of grease, dab that to the bottom. Put your larger seat on first. It has a curvature for the O-ring. Slide the flat side down. Take your O-ring. Put that on. And the curvature goes towards the O-ring. Put this on. Wipe the threads clean. Next, we're going to put a little bit of Loctite. Just a little dab. Try not to get it into the hole. Set that to the side. I guess lay this down. We need to come back to our little head and put our new seat in. Very tiny parts. If you can, try to assemble them first. The small end of the spring attaches to the seat. Slide that in to it. tap that down. With your Loctite still on, tighten yourself up. Try to get it fairly tight. Wipe off any Loctite that has oozed out. Once this is done, set this to the side. Let's turn our attention to all of our O-rings and supports. Let's take off the split ring, set him to the side. I like to wipe everything down. So what we have to do now is to take off the old O-rings and the O-ring supports. They come off very easy. Like to make sure everything is really clean. If you have a vise available, go to your vise now. Now that we're secure on a vise, take out your 4 studs. Take some channel locks. They don't have to be this large. And firmly undo yourself. Now that you have your head off, finish cleaning this to where it's spotless. Take your piston, slide it up. It may come off like that, that's okay. Put him back down. Take your little pick. There are some seals inside of here that need to be changed. Locate those seals in your maintenance bag and take them out. Set those aside. Clean your inside down. Take a little bit of grease, put it on the inside. Carefully take your new seals, position them in. One support goes in, O-ring goes in, then the other support. After you get your new seals in, take a little bit of the grease. With your compressor, you should have a white grease syringe. Use that grease that is in the syringe, and only use that grease that is in the syringe. After your new seals are in, lube it all up. This goes this way. Carefully work yourself on. There you go. It's going to be very tight fit. Let's take your part here, put some grease around this particular O-ring and around there, and screw it back on. Tighten your part very tightly. After you have tightened your part, take your 4 studs, put a little bit of Loctite on it. What you want to do is to tighten these to where it is flush with the bottom. Once they are all tight, we can proceed with the next step. Take your part out of your vise. You can reinsert your grease port at this time. Tighten down that fully. And your little air filter. Tighten down that fully. After you've removed your part from the vise, tighten your filter up. Not too tight though. Make sure all your parts are very clean. Wipe the excess Loctite away from your threads. At this stage, I put a lot of grease on the seals and shafts. In your maintenance bag, take out your seals necessary to rebuild this. Put your support on first. Your O-rings should be in the middle of your supports. I like to add a little extra grease. Take your split ring, wipe him off, put some new clean grease on, put him there. Take your cylinder, make sure he is clean. So let's put some new grease on the inside. He can fight you going back on. It doesn't matter which side, they're both the same. Kind of gently work yourself on. Again, it can fight you. Well, once you've gotten it back on, work your split ring as well. Slide him on, push it down. I like to take a longer Q-tip and just clean the cylinder walls. It also adds a little bit of grease in that port. Take your part, dab some on there, and gently rock it while you're inserting, being very careful. Make sure that is very tight. I like to add a little bit of grease to the shaft. Remember to make sure that your steel pin is in. At this point, let's take your head back. Make sure your two black balls are in and your lock washer is seated at the bottom. Just make sure things are clean. Try to get it on. This could fight you as well. Make sure he is tight. Again, make sure there's plenty of grease on this shaft. Slide your piston head back on. Take your 4 lock washers and nuts and put them back on. Take your ratchet with a 10mm socket, gently tighten it in a crisscross pattern. You should be at this point. Take your 2 split rings that you've already wiped down and their landings. Put some grease. Take your cylinder and clean your cylinder thoroughly. I like to take some grease and put it in the cylinder. Your cylinder should be positioned with the flat on top. Carefully try to pull it apart a little bit. I like to put a little bit of extra grease in at this point. This top split ring can fight you. And it goes on just like that. Make sure you have enough grease everywhere. Add more grease in bottom cylinder. I like to dab a little bit of grease on the needle bearings. Make sure your O-ring is still present. Your large grease port goes in the very back. Rotate your crankshaft, your connecting rod around. You have to kind of pull so he has a little bit more length to him. Try to hold on to it. Don't let these two parts separate. Connect your connecting rod with the crankshaft. Keep these two parts together as you push down, getting all 4 studs in alignment. Put on washers, lock washers, and your 4 nuts. Your washers go on first. Take your 14mm wrench and tighten down in a crisscross pattern. It just has to be snug. Let's go in now and put your crankshaft Allen back in. Making sure your little tiny washer is still there. Get it as tight as you can. Take your washer, put that on. Your brass air filter needs to be in the bottom position. Put your 4 Allens back in. Once that is tight, let's go back and put our small water hose back on. Let's put our water pump back on as well so it doesn't spill out. Position your water pump in the straight ahead position. Take a 13mm open end, tighten. Gently push on the fitting as you're tightening to seat it. Just snug is fine. Take your 18mm open end and tighten your large fitting. Again, just snug is fine. Let's take your steel line, making sure that your O-ring is still there. Hand tighten. 2 14mm open ends. Again, just snug is fine. Once we reach this point here, now let's carefully put our cover back on. Make sure all your lines are safe, making sure nothing is kinked. Let's take your air line, put him back up, push him up firmly. Make sure that your grease port screw is aligned up with its back hole. Everything is secure now. Let's tighten our steel line, hand tighten, always verifying your O-rings are still there. Again, 2 14mm open ends. Just snug is fine. Double checking. Nothing is kinked. All your lines are free. These particular lines can go back up. What we have to do now, take out the wrench that is supplied with your compressor. This is your main check valve and also where your burst disc is located. Take this off, wipe it down. Take the supplied tweezers, take out the spring and the check valve. Some check valves look a little bit different. Kind of make sure it is clean as well. Put those to the side. After we've done this, let's plug it in and turn the compressor on. Once you've verified everything is tight and you have your check valve taken out, plug your compressor back in. Turn it on. Wait for the water pump to start flowing and your fan to turn on. Verify that you do have water flowing. Your compressor will not work if the water pump is not flowing. This part right here is the water flow control valve. If this detects any air in the system, it'll automatically shut the system down. Always make sure your water tank is full. Now, let's just start the compressor. Let it pump for a little bit. Make sure there is no grease coming out of your high pressure cylinder port. If there's any grease present, it will overheat your check valve. Put your check valve in this position with the little nub in the down position. Take the tweezers out that are supplied with your kit and position. Make sure that your little spring has a small end in the down position. Position that over the spring support. Make sure your brass fitting is nice and clean. There is an O-ring on that. And carefully tighten this back up. About 10 or 15 pounds worth of pressure is fine. You can put your little O-ring back on for your support, for the grease support. It's mainly cosmetic, just like that. Let's turn it back on. Let's check to make sure what pressure we're at. 4,000 is just fine. Let's put it back on. Take your solenoid control and turn it on about 10 or 15 minutes. We don't want the solenoid opening up at this point. We want to verify we have PSI building. As you can see, our gauge is starting to move. Let's just let this build up and shut itself off. It may take a couple of minutes. The unit has shut itself off. What I like to do is to turn the unit off completely, listening for any air leaks. Watch your gauge. If your gauge starts to drop, you know one of your fittings must be loose. If all looks good, release your air. And you can start putting your screws back in. Secure your bottom first. The 3 long screws go on the top and the 3 short screws go on the bottom. This concludes rebuilding the piston on your Omega supercharger. Thanks for watching.
All right, now we're recording. That was a good dry run. Let's do it from the top.
Yeah, I was gonna kill you. That'd be horrible. That's pretty funny though.